all here. We are going to flip the script on Alzheimer's and caregiving. The thought is, what if we approach dementia and care differently, challenging old assumptions, embracing creative solutions, finding new ways to bring dignity, connection, and even joy into experience. This panel is about finding fresh perspectives and small outside the box shifts that can make a big impact for both those living with dementia and their caregivers. We are honored to have a group of forward thinkers here. Thank you so much for joining us to help us reimagine what's possible. So we are going to jump on in. Instead of reading super long intros, I'm going to kind of give a little intro to who you guys are each in your questions. And then if you want to expand on more on your work as you answer, that would be great. So we're going to start with Jennifer. Jennifer is a clinical associate professor and founding director of the Dementia Engagement Education and Research, for DEAR, program at the University of Nevada, Reno School of Public Health. She has dedicated her career to creating dementia-friendly communities and innovative approaches to care. So, Jennifer, tell us, so much of dementia care focuses on what's hard, but you emphasize engagement, inclusion, reimagining care. How can caregivers begin to shift their approach, even in small ways, to create more moments of joy and connection in their daily lives?
Well, thank you, Lauren, for the question, and thank you for having me here and for all of your incredible advocacy. Before I respond to the question, I'd love to just add one extra detail, which is that, like so many people who are here today, I want to highlight that I'm also a family care partner, or I should say I was a family care partner. I lost my dad in December to Lewy body dementia, and obviously still raw. But that's an experience that has really, I think, shaped my understanding about this topic and your question. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to reflect and to share some of my thoughts. And so I think, for many people, dementia is seen only as a tragedy, and caregiving is seen only as a burden. And while I can attest personally to the challenges of loss and hardship, those challenges are very real. I don't think they represent the whole story. What if we did dare to see dementia radically different? What if instead of thinking about managing dementia, what if we focused on nurturing life? And instead of focusing on grieving what's slipping away, what if we just celebrate what remains, which for my dad was presence, curiosity, humor, and love to the very, very end. And care partnering, I can tell you care partnering is not just about sacrifice. No, for me, it's about meaning, it's about love, and it was even about growth. I genuinely believe that being a family care partner has made me a better person, a much better person. And so now I'm going to go even a little further to say that I believe that dementia has something really profound to teach all of us, not just those directly affected, but the world. It calls us to slow down and to be present and to listen more deeply and to act with compassion. And it reminds us that it is more important to be kind than to be right. And I think those are important opportunities for us because we live in a world that prioritizes speed and productivity and independence. But dementia is teaching us something very different. And I think it's something essential. And that's that we exist in relationship with each other. And so in a way, I guess dementia, I would hope that care partners would see dementia not just as a challenge, but as an invitation to heal, and not even just as individuals, but maybe even as a society. And one small but powerful way we begin this healing process, I believe, is to really just lean in to presence. It's about being rather than doing. And that's hard in our culture. But I believe when we can be, when we can release expectations about how things should be or how we wish they were, when we can release those expectations, Lauren, that's when we create space for joy to come in and to totally surprise us.
Wow, what did you just say? We should try to be kind and not right. How did you say
Yeah.
that? That was wow. That was a real wisdom, a brick of wisdom you just threw in here. That's so amazing. Thank you. Um, Jessica, we're going to come to you next. She's a passionate advocate and thought leader in caregiving with over a decade of experience in the field. She recently launched Jessica C. Guthrie Caregiving Consultancy, a pioneering consultative service dedicated to helping companies, brands, healthcare organizations develop more comprehensive strategies that amplify and validate the critical experiences of being a family caregiver. Jennifer, you challenge traditional views of caregiving, helping families see their role as more than just managing decline, but as actively shaping a fulfilling, engaged life for their loved ones. So tell us, you emphasize that while Alzheimer's is a terminal illness, it doesn't mean that it's a death sentence tomorrow. So how can caregivers shift their mindset from solely managing decline to actively affirming and empowering their loved ones, keeping them engaged, valued, and deeply connected to life?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Hi, everyone. Jessica C. Guthrie. I am the daughter of Constance Guthrie, and I have been her full-time caregiver for the last 10 years and 4 months as she's been living with Alzheimer's disease. I am an only child. She's a single mother, and I am a solo caregiver. And I moved back home officially in 2019 to my childhood bedroom to take care of her. My mom is now living with late-stage Alzheimer's disease. She's a 7E on the FAST scale, fully bedbound, no longer ambulatory yet. I like to say she's still thriving in this stage because she very much knows that I am her caregiver, I am her daughter, and that I am here with her every single day. And so to answer your question, I think I look at it from both sides. Yes, Alzheimer's disease is, a terminal illness, and we know what the end is going to be. But the end doesn't happen tomorrow when you get a diagnosis. My mom was 66 when she was diagnosed. I was 26 years old. And what people need to realize is that when my mom was diagnosed, she was still working. My mom was still driving. She was still living independently. My mother was still engaging in conversations. She could still feel all of her emotions, right? And so, it's our responsibility to meet our people where they're at, to ensure that they still feel loved and connected to and engaged with, because frankly, my mom was very much still present, right? And so I made sure to still show up and see her and view her as my mother that loved to sing, that loved to be outside and sit on her porch and gossip about people. Yes, did things change over time? Yes, have I had to evolve how I engage with her? But my mother still laughs. My mother still smiles. My mother still says, "Thank you, Jessie," right? And all of those moments tell me that treating her and seeing her humanity, even as the disease has progressed, is truly just appreciated, but also I think has allowed her to still feel connected and to thrive even as her disease has progressed. I think on the flip side, for the caregiver or for the family member, whomever is caring, it's important, yes, to acknowledge the diagnosis, to acknowledge the reality of the journey that this will be hard. This will be difficult. There will be ups and downs. And in the midst of wanting to have all the answers, give me all the tips, tricks, tools, create all the routines and systems, all of those things can be true, but you don't have to do all of that in the first week of a diagnosis. In fact, your person doesn't even want or need half of those things in the first week of a diagnosis. Your person wants for you to sit and be present with them, to get proximate to them, to continue to make memories. Because frankly, I can tell you, all of you on this call, that after 10 years on this journey, I don't remember all the systems I made, but I remember the time that I sat on the couch with my mom and we sang gospel songs back and forth, right? Those are the memories that I got because I saw my mom for who she was in each moment versus trying to solve every problem and like be the thing that fixed, what she was experiencing in that moment. So that's what I encourage, is that yes, we know the journey. And if we don't know the journey, we can figure out the journey over time. And we know it's going to be difficult. But the thing that will matter most is how you actually center your person and their humanity and ensuring that they feel loved, feel seen, feel valued along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. It is so hard not to jump right to the end and be like, I need something that's going to fix all of it. And I'm going to stop in a track and I want to know everything right now. Or it's all just doom and gloom when it's not. My mom too was working when she was diagnosed and driving and thriving and in her own way. And it's so important to remember those things. Oh, God, this is a great conversation. Okay. So Dasha, we're coming to you next. After receiving her MA in clinical psychology from Columbia, Dasha became a live-in caregiver for a Holocaust survivor suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Her book, Travelers to Unimaginable Lands, Stories of Dementia, the Caregiver, and the Human Brain, published to wide acclaim both in the US and abroad, and it interweaves stories, case histories, and brain science to illuminate the neurological challenges facing family caregivers. You are an expert in the psychology of caregiving, and you've spent years helping caregivers navigate the emotional and mental challenges that come with supporting someone with dementia. So for you, the question is, your book explores the emotional and cognitive struggles that caregivers face, not just the challenges of the person with dementia. So what's one common mental or emotional pitfall that caregivers experience, and how can they help to reframe their thinking to better support both themselves and their loved ones?
Oh gosh, there are so many pitfalls to being a caregiver. But a common one I hear from caregivers is they say, Dasha, I keep promising myself not to be so reactive, to be flexible, to be kind, not to argue, but I keep losing it. Or they say, caregivers, they tell me that I know how I'm supposed to behave. I know I'm supposed to change. But every time I see my mom, we get locked into our old family pattern. And so caregivers, in addition to carrying around so much responsibility, oftentimes carry around a lot of shame about their behavior when they're not quite as kind as they wish to be. And so my first priority to reframe is to actually normalize their struggle and explain that their reactions are not due to being quote unquote bad caregivers, but that their reactions are actually common and profoundly human. And the reason for that is that it's not just the person with dementia who's changing. It's that the caregiver, their brain is also changing and their brain is also profoundly vulnerable. And the reason for that is if we consider what caregivers do, the chronic stress, the isolation, the grief, the relentless demands of caregiving, it's not only hard, but it's hard on our brains. It lowers our ability to be calm. It lowers our ability to be flexible. It decreases our judgment. It makes it harder for us to be reasonable. So this is why so many caregivers are saying, Dasha, I feel like I'm unraveling. My mind is not working the way it should be. And the way I try to reframe their predicament is to invite caregivers, let's hold off judgment on your behavior and let's look at these perceived shortcomings. And instead of scolding yourself, let's look at how your struggle is actually valid, natural, and let's see what we could learn from it. So, for example, if you're dealing with a wife who's becoming increasingly short-tempered with her husband, I say, could we process what's going on with you? Why do you think that this is how you're behaving? Are there boundaries that are being pushed? Are your limits at capacity? Are your mental energies decreasing? Is your husband maybe poking an emotional wound that has always been there? And once caregivers recognize the source of their difficulty, once they begin to reckon with the fact that their own brain has limitations, they could be much more capable of self-compassion. And the important thing with self-compassion is the more kindness you could give to yourself, the kinder you are going to be towards the person you're caring for. And the research bears this out, that self-compassion is contagious and it is reciprocal. So my first priority is to begin with a caregiver and not to be afraid or not to hide and shame. It's the times when we're not quite as perfect and not quite as calm and as patient and as kind as we would like to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's right. It's like the old put your own mask on first, the oxygen mask on the airplane, put yours on first, because if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people.
Exactly.
Oh, it's hard for caregivers. Okay, Jay. Coming to you, Jay is the CEO and founder of MemoryWell, a patient engagement platform that is personalizing how health insurers connect with their members. She authored the 2016 best-selling book, Broad Influence: How Women Are Changing the Way America Works. You have so harnessed the power of storytelling to transform dementia care, strengthening connection, and improving patient engagement. MemoryWell, which you founded, is built on the idea that storytelling can transform dementia care. So how can caregivers use storytelling in their own homes, whether through written stories, photos, conversation, to improve care and strengthen their connection with their loved ones? Oh,
I have to unmute. Sorry, can you guys hear me now?
yeah, now we hear you.
So I'm saying thanks so much, Lauren. It's great to see you. And Dasha, I think I need to hire you for my mother-in-law because she's got a lot of anger issues against my father-in-law, who's unfortunately got vascular dementia. But so my dad, and this is actually my second rodeo going around with it with my in-laws now. My father had Alzheimer's and he passed in 2016. But my father, you know, I'm a storyteller by nature. I was at Time Magazine for a decade, and was at Bloomberg News before that. Spent a lot of time on CNN and MSNBC, and you know, the idea that when you put somebody into a community, which is a really hard decision to make, and for me, I tried to keep him at home as long as possible. And my parents had a great marriage, but when my mother died, I looked like a lot like my mother, and unfortunately, my dad would want to make out with me all the time, and like, which is very awkward, and it just wasn't working out for me to stay at home with him and then have him at home, and so I needed to put him into a community, and that was, I think, the hardest day of my life, was that day where I felt like I couldn't care for him because he had been such an incredible caregiver for me growing up and was just an amazing parent, and it felt like defeat. And then you put him into this community and they just don't know anything about him, and they don't know how to relate to him. And he had a lot of anger issues, and they would just say to him, "Oh, Mr. Small, please calm down." And I was like, then that would just enrage him more, really. Like, I mean, and so I finally said, like, look, you know, you have to know who he is in order to talk to him, and you have to understand where he's coming from in order to calm him down. And so my dad was Australian. He was this very happy-go-lucky, charismatic guy. And and so instead of saying, "Please, Mr. Small, please calm down," they would say to him, "Oh, Gray," which was his childhood nickname from Graham, you know, "Your mom Clarice, your sister Cecily, they're coming for a visit. Like, maybe we should get you changed for golf." And every single one of those words would hit with him. He'd be like, "Oh, my mom, my sister, those are their names. I love golf." You know, that would like resonate with him. And he'd be like, "Yes, okay." He would be totally great with it. And so I think like understanding that he's, you know, this human with this complicated history, and he's not just this chart of issues, whether it's an in-home caregiver or whether it's somebody in a community, it's not just like the ticking off the box of like, have I bathed him? Have I fed him? Have I, you know, engaged him in activity? It's really connecting with him and becoming, you know, and forging those connections. And so when I told my dad's story, which really was what led me to start MemoryWell, there were two of these caregivers in his community who were Ethiopian, and they'd never realized, even 6 months into it, that he'd actually lived and worked in Ethiopia for 4 years early on in his career, and they became his champions. They would sit for hours and ask him what it was like to work with Emperor Haile Selassie and what was the Empress like. And Dad loved it because he still remembered very well his early 20s at that point from Africa, even if he didn't remember like last week or last month or last year. And so I think it's really important to like understand the context of them, and who they are. We also developed these timelines so that, you know, I used to say to him when I would visit, like, "Hey, Dad, like, how old are we today?" And he would be like, sometimes he'd be 40, sometimes he'd be 20, like sometimes he didn't know any age. And so, but if I knew if he was in his 20s, he liked certain kinds of like Beatles music and certain kinds of music. And so I would always have this timeline kind of on my iPad where I would be like, okay, we're gonna like meet you where you are, and we're gonna go 20s, you know, all of the music from your 20s now, and then, or if he was in his 40s, would be like MASH and like you know, and like Peter, Paul and Mary, all these things. And so I would go and play him that music, and it really enabled him to like get him out of his shell towards the end, and it was really great. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about, right, meeting someone where they're at is so important, yet so hard sometimes. But when you do, you can actually make some headway. You can connect, and it's really beautiful. Jennifer, You work really closely with communities to co-create innovative dementia care solutions. What's one small but powerful shift you've seen in a community or care setting that's made a meaningful difference for people living with dementia or their caregivers?
It's a great question. And I shared one already, which is that shift from the tragedy narrative to this narrative that's full of possibilities, opening the door for people to actually live well with dementia. But I just want to add one more thought to that idea, which is that if you, as a care partner, don't believe that it's possible to live well with dementia, then it may never happen. Care partners, your mindset is a super powerful force. But so I'm gonna share this super fast. Actually, because I was like, I can't prioritize. I mean, do three super quick. One is that it's helpful to shift how we see ourselves. And so you may have noticed that instead of using terminology like caregivers, I try to embrace my role as a care partner. Because care partnering is about reciprocity and supporting the contributions that people living with dementia can make. And those contributions can be really big, like some of the work we do here at the DEAR program, where we partner with people living with dementia to create new innovations. And sometimes those contributions can seem small, but they're actually really meaningful, like just recognizing the ways that a person living with dementia can change us, to help us to become more patient, more present, or more interdependent. And so, but the third shift, though, which is like one of the most powerful I've ever seen in care settings, is reframing so-called dementia behaviors as communication. And so stigmatized labels like anxiety, aggression, wandering, resisting care, sexually inappropriate. Well, what if we stopped seeing these as problems to be managed and instead understood that these are expressions of distress and communication of unmet needs? And so here's the challenge for everyone. It's your optional homework. Just try it. Replace the word behavior with the word distress, and then seek to understand what's really going on. For example, is my dad sundowning, or is he responding to the buildup of stress across the day? And so the latter framing invites me as a care partner to really consider ways that I could better support my dad proactively so that he can rest and recover and never experience that distress in the first place. And then my final shift here, and I know it's one that most of us have been taught, including me, but it's shifting from redirection to love. And so earlier in my career, and I've been supporting people living with dementia since 1987. So I had a lot of bad habits that I've had to unlearn. But earlier in my career, I was the queen of redirection, which meant that I could really charm someone into temporarily dropping whatever it is that they were trying to do and somehow convince them to follow my agenda instead. And, that's just the way I was trained. But over the years, I started to realize that redirection is really just a nice way of saying distract and disregard the person. And there's nothing compassionate about distracting and disregarding another human being. And so my reframe now, my shift is to love. And LOVE, love, is great. Happy Valentine's Day, by the way. But I mean LUVE, which is a framework I learned from my friend Phyllis Fair, who lives well with dementia. And Phyllis says L means listen, and not just with your ears. U means understand, truly seek to understand that person's inner experience instead of just redirecting them. V is for validate, honor their emotions, even if you don't agree with the content. And then finally, E is for empower, help meet their needs in a way that preserves their dignity and self-determination to the greatest extent possible. So love, LUVE, is better than redirection. So that's it. 4 shifts: tragedy to possibility, behavior to communication, caregiving to care partnering, and then redirection to love. And the best news is, folks, that these shifts don't require any specialized training. They don't require any large amounts of money or even extra time. They just require empathy, curiosity, presence, and the actual belief that we can reimagine dementia.
Whew, that was never heard any of those things before, and that was fascinating. Thank you. I love I love LUVE. Jessica, family caregivers are often seen as secondary to medical professionals, yet they hold such invaluable knowledge about their loved ones. So how can caregivers reimagine and reclaim their role as very powerful advocates in these medical settings? And what are some of the practical steps they can take to build sort of a stronger, more collaborative relationship with their healthcare providers?
Yes.
Ricky.
I deeply believe that the family caregiver is literally the linchpin in the entire care system. And when the family caregiver is set up to thrive, everyone else thrives. Because, as you just mentioned in your question, right, the family caregiver is the expert in their person. I can only speak for myself, but I was here with my mom. Even when I was a long distance caregiver, I knew everything, every appointment, every move, every transition, right? Like I documented it all. I understood the full story. And so I share that because I actually want for family caregivers, partners, however you want to label yourself, to fully understand that you are the expert in your person. You know them best. You know what makes them tick. And there is no way that any medical professional that sees your person for 8 to 15 minutes can tell you more about your person than you, right? And so I want for everyone on this call to own the title of being responsible for someone's care, being responsible for someone's thriving, being responsible for someone's well-being, because that's exactly what you are when you are someone's, well, when I, as my mother's caregiver. I think the second thing I'll say is that, our medical system is a lot going on, okay? People are busy, people are exhausted, people are stressed. And so no one really has time to truly like see us and like, create meaningful relationships. However, what I will say, because you're stepping into the power of what it means to be a caregiver, it's also our jobs to step into the power of owning the narrative and owning the data and owning the documentation. So come prepared, right? Because people respect you more when you know what you're talking about. Have everything documented, have all your trends ready to go, have your questions ready. Why? Because people quickly want to move you through an appointment. But if I got a list of 6 questions, we're going to ask these 6 questions, okay? So come prepared. The second thing I'll say is that you want to always proactively share. You become knowledgeable and people start to trust you and like, oh, that caregiver has their stuff together because you've kept people in the loop, right? You've been proactive in sharing the changes, the adjustments that might be happening. And the last thing I'll say is like follow up and share consistently. Just don't leave an appointment and wait 6 months to update people. It's actually like, oh no, my name will be in your inbox every 3 weeks. Why? Because you're not going to forget me or my mom. And I know that sounds like overkill, but guess what? Every single medical professional that has stepped into our home knows that Jessica doesn't play. They know the story of my mom and how I want to leverage them. And that's important in being respected, being listened to, and being prioritized in the midst of so much happening in our medical system. I'll pause there for time.
I mean, I want to say amen after each of you speak, because I just feel like we're really, you guys are just, there is so much knowledge being dropped here. It's so amazing. I feel like I'm learning a lot, which, I've been at this a long time. So this is really, I'm just so inspired at the moment. Dasha, okay, caregiving, oh yes, can feel so isolating. But you've spent years fostering support systems for caregivers. So what's a simple yet powerful way caregivers can build or strengthen their own support network, even if they feel they have such little time or energy to do it?
Yeah. I think it's so important to know why it's so important, because caregivers are so burdened. The idea of self-care could seem like another thing on the list, and it could feel incredibly overwhelming and burdensome. And the reason it's so important to just do a little bit in terms of connecting with other people is because dementia disorders can be incredibly isolating. And when we're isolated, it doesn't just feel bad, it is actually a danger to our cognitive health. And so it's so important that when you're a caregiver and you feel, and oftentimes this is the case when you're, is that you're no longer able to share the world with the person you're caring for. You're not oftentimes able to inhabit the same world. And it could be a terribly lonely feeling, which again, doesn't just feel bad. It really affects our physical, emotional, and cognitive health. And so I oftentimes begin with caregivers by saying, you know, to understand their identity, which they oftentimes forget because they're so consumed by caregiving. So I really try to understand, who are you? What is important? What is meaningful? What gives you purpose? And then we work from there. So with one caregiver, I learned that she's a huge comedy nerd. And that is a very big part of what brings her pleasure and connection. And so we began with very short 10-minute walks of her listening to her comedy podcast. And later, my sneaky agenda was for her to build on that, and for her to eventually, she joined an improv troupe. And what was really wonderful about that, it was only once a month, but she was able to look forward to it because she knew that there would be a place where she would not only share a world with other people, she would create that world. She would create the absurdity, the kind of absurdity she wanted, not the one that she was getting at home, that she was going to create this silliness and this connection with other human beings. And that actually nourished her for that month, just knowing it was there. So you don't have to do anything crazy. Some people choose to volunteer, and it might seem odd to give when all your life is giving as a caregiver, but it's giving on your terms. And being around other people who have the same values and purpose that you do. And so I feel that it could be very, very small, but just knowing that it's out there, that there's a community of people who share what is meaningful with you, is deeply restorative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually, just before this, had a pretty profound moment. I shared our documentary, Taking Care, actually at my high school in Florida. I'm in Florida right now, with, I think there were, I don't know, 60, 75 students, high school students, juniors and seniors. And then we talked about it afterwards, and I asked them to raise their hands of who in the room had a loved one with dementia. And I would say 80% of them, it could have even been 85, 90%, truly, almost everyone in that room raised their hand. And then I said, and who had talked to their friends? Who's talked to their friends about their loved one's dementia?
Mm-hmm.
2 of them. Like, isn't that extraordinary? That they are carrying this alone, and that helps no one, and you would never be able to get into a community when you keep it so secret. And I did early on. My mom didn't want me to share it, and then I did, and I found community, I found strength, and I found hope. So anyway, it was such a fascinating moment to see that, truly. Okay, let's keep going. Jay, so you've worked both in journalism and of course in patient engagement, 2 fields that rely on deep listening and human connection. So what lessons from your reporting career have shaped how you think about dementia care, and how can caregivers apply those insights in their daily interactions?
Oh, it's a fascinating question. So I think one of the biggest lessons, and this is more just on like I would say on a personal level that I found, was, my father got dementia when he was 58, and it was a really early onset, and I was still a senior in college. And there's this sense of, oh my gosh, am I going to get it? Right? Like, is this something that, because it's early onset, but then we had no family history of it. And so I started researching this, and I thought, and to find out actually down the road that less than 5% of those living with Alzheimer's and dementia actually, is actually genetic. It's actually all environmental, was a huge revelation for me. And I think really changed the way I thought about the disease, and how I thought about it as it applied to myself, and like, and how it applied to my dad. And it was a huge relief in a lot of ways, like, oh, I'm not necessarily going to get this. But then it also made me think, okay, I need to really take care of myself and moving forward, and be brain, they say heart healthy is brain healthy, be heart healthy, like go and exercise every day. I live in New Mexico right now, and so being able to hike in different trails every day, like learning new paths, like literally challenges your brain as you're moving. And so Maria Shriver does this great Let's Move campaign with Alzheimer's. And the whole idea is like, don't do the treadmill. You don't do the same thing all the time. Like always mix it up so you're challenging your brain as you're moving your body. And I think that's really brilliant. And then obviously the whole Mediterranean diet and all that, those kinds of things. I think also, I've so many people who've come up to me when I talk about my dad's story or even my father-in-law's story now. And after every time I talk about it, they kind of will like line up and then they'll look furtively and be like, make sure no one else is listening. And they're like, well, I have this loved one and they also are doing something. And I'm like, and it breaks my heart that, like you were saying, there's so much stigma attached to this that you almost feel like you have to whisper it to somebody. And they say, thank you so much for talking so openly about these things. And, it's really hard. And I'm like, I wish that more people would speak openly about this. And because it isn't until I think more people in America and more people, particularly politicians and those in power, realize like how much caregiving is costing this country. I mean, how much unpaid caregiving is happening. It's more than $250 billion annually. It is a huge drain on the economy. And it isn't until we really discuss these issues and how hard this is to like hold down a full-time job and care for somebody to, especially, Jessica, to be an only child, like I was an only child as well. And that is, to have no other support or very limited support. And to try and make your ends meet for the regular American. We're entering into this time right now where Alzheimer's is the only thing that's going up, like in the top 10 causes of death, it's going up like crazy, and everything else is going down. They're finding all these new treatments for cancer and everything else. And to be able to like give the adequate amount of resources. I mean, there's like hundreds of billions of dollars spent on cancer research every year. There's nowhere near spent that on Alzheimer's. There's so much money spent on like caregiving for these other diseases. There's very little. And Alzheimer's is a much more demanding disease and dementia to caregive for than almost anything else. And so I think just being able to say something like 7 out of 10 Americans are going to need some form of long-term care in the future. Less than 3 out of 10 have saved towards that. Less than 1 out of 10 have saved enough, right? And so being able to say like, openly we need help and like and not be embarrassed by it, I think is so important right now.
So important to just tell your story. If you keep it all in, there's no way you'll get help. You'll navigate alone. Oh, we just got our 2-minute warning. Should we open, does anyone in the chat? I feel like I saw a question in the chat come by. Let's see if I can find it really quickly. I don't know where it is. I lost the question. It's too far up. I don't know where it is. Does anyone want to add on to anything while I'm looking for the one question that I saw? Oh, here we go. I feel bad for those who don't have many people. I couldn't imagine my mom's health being left up to someone else. How do you let go of that advocacy stage to take a break and let others care? That's a hard one. Letting other people care. Oh boy. I mean, I'll say for me, I'll just say this. My dad was my mom's primary caregiver, and that was hard to get our roles defined. He was caring for her. I felt like it was my job to care for him. Okay, 1.5 minutes. Who wants to take it?
I'll just say be proactive in getting the additional support that you need. Don't wait until you're in a crisis, because if you wait that long, you're not going to have very good options. So really try to find that team-based approach before you start to experience those feelings of being burned out.
Yeah.
How do you let go? You understand and believe that you are worthy of caring for yourself. You are worthy of a break. You are worthy of time, whether it is the 5-minute meditation in the morning, the grocery store, or like a respite visit. Take the time and trust that whomever you've hired or someone to step in is going to be there for that moment of time and truly pour back into you so you can show back up for your person.
And apply for one of our respite grants, truly. Having a trained professional come in can perhaps give you the respite that you need to keep going.